Well, thank you, everybody. Welcome. And today we're going to be going over our records management and really kind of explaining how the records management module works in Laserfiche, how easy it is to use, how well it is at really being able to present you with different views within the system based on whether or not you're a records manager or if you are just a regular user. So really, want to start off with kind of the basics. What is records management? Records management is a system for identifying, classifying, archiving, preserving, and destroying important digital and physical information that we call records. The main duties of a records management system is to manage a record throughout its life cycle. This includes the filing, searching, retrieval, creating retention schedules, transferring, and as of course, usually the final step is destruction. Some of the reasons for using records management, kind of the importance of having it available to you, is really typically records management requirements arise from a company and or a government regulation. So because of the regulations involved, it is vital that records are handled in a way that is compliant with the regulation that is set up. This not only ensures proper handling, but it also minimizes an organization's risk in the event of discovery. Organizations are responsible for managing their records in compliance with certain guidelines, and they're not only liable for the record, but also for proving that records were handled in accordance with the regulation or their retention schedule. Fundamental concept behind records management is the idea that records have a definite life cycle. It involves various stages that we utilize. For example, when a record is created, it must be filed according to a well-defined file plan. So it's brought into the system, filed accordingly, so that we can track it and keep an eye on the rest of the life cycle. Once a record has been retained for a specific time period, it may need to be destroyed in order to comply with government or company regulations. So the primary responsibility of a records manager is to manage records according to a formal file plan set forth by a governing body, usually the records management team within most organizations. Due to their job responsibilities, records managers are often forced to be more interested in the retention rules that they must follow rather than the importance of a record's content in terms of what really is within that, the business perspective. Therefore, they're more concerned with designing a structure that logically satisfies the retention schedule. The key to following the retention rules is having the ability to categorize every piece of information within the file plan. In many cases, the layout of formal records management file plan is related to the fact that different retention schedules apply to different types of documents. For example, a records manager might be required to organize accounting documents by its document type. So you might store invoices for a certain amount of time, you might store checks for a certain amount of time, and those time frames are more important than the actual how it is filed within the system. So in most organizations, the majority of users are not records managers, obviously. So these users need quick and easy access to documents. They don't want to learn an unintuitive records management layout, and they most definitely do not want to be concerned with any records management processes. Your average user doesn't doesn't worry about old historical data on an everyday basis. For this reason, most general users want to organize documents based on the content. This structure is much more easy to use from a general user standpoint and doesn't require, but they don't work for records managers. And I will be showing you examples of these. So what do we do to be able to handle scenarios for both your records management and your general users? We use transparent records management in order to organize the same repository in a manner that both groups prefer simultaneously. This process is transparent because it enables general users to see through the complex record management layout to the layout of their choice. With transparent records management requirements do not interfere with business needs and allow record managers to retain control over the way information is categorized and filed outside the view of everyday users of the system. A well-designed system will handle records management transparently, meaning that once it's set up, users will not have to actively participate in the process, while records managers will still have control over their final file indexing, archiving, and disposition. One of the greatest strengths of transparent records management functionality is that multiple views of the repository can be configured to allow a records manager to monitor and act on records through one folder structure while other users access one or several folder structures organized more logically for their needs. With proper TRM configured, you are not confined to having just the one folder structure for your business. It's possible to create numerous views based on the business needs. And now we'll go ahead and just take a look at kind of an example of this. So this is a view of what a records manager might see when they're looking at HR documents within a system. The records manager can monitor and act on records through one folder structure. You can see it's broken down actually by different document types rather than the employee themselves. This here is the view that a normal HR user would see. So they would see the human resources folder, and then within the human resources folder, each of their employees would be able to be seen there. All right. So let's see this in action and actually walk through the process within our VM here. And actually, I need to log out. I apologize.
Well, it gives me an opportunity to show this guy out. Obviously, the first step of any records management process is actually getting paper or files into the system. And considering we have a partnership with Canon that some of you are already aware of, we offer these Canon scanners at a discount because we're a bulk reseller. And so this machine right here, which does between 60 pages a minute, but 120 images per minute because it will scan both sides at the same time, is actually under $2,000. It's a really solid piece of machinery. It can run tens of thousands of scans a day, although I can't imagine most of you will actually need that, and you can also do 11 by 17. And just to give you an idea of how fast the machine is, go ahead and give you go ahead and click on the scan button there. When processing through Laserfiche scanning, which of course will take up all of the image enhancement tools that are inherent within Laserfiche, you can get a pretty good idea of how fast the machine is and how quickly it can process information. So I take this opportunity to show off what a great product Canon offers, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask any of us, and we can tell you more about this.
All right. So basically what we're going to do is bring some documents into this incoming scans, and file them based on our employees. So we have a couple of different folders out here. This is what the normal human resources person will see as they go through their system. And I'm just going to, select a few of these documents, assign my HR template to them. So we'll say that this is some application materials. We'll give it a date, go ahead and hit OK. And then the last two here, we'll file these ones just a little bit differently. And this one we'll just call some tax records. Now, ordinarily, I would have this set to, at the time that the documents come into the system, they would just run through this process. I've just set it up as a process that I can start on demand. And so we'll go ahead and run the process through here. And now we'll see these documents start to disappear, and they're going to be filed into the folder structure according to the file plan. You can see here that in our Human Resources folder, it has actually gone out and created a new folder for Justin. Looks like I didn't use the same number both times, so that's my fault. You can see that his tax records are filed appropriately. All the application materials are filed here, and the human resources person is done. They have the information that they need. It's filed in a logical way. Now, if we are a records manager, we want to see the system in a much different format. All right, so when the records manager logs in, they can add files to the system if they want to, so they can still see the incoming scans, but you'll notice that underneath there, they have personnel records. And the personnel records are broken up more by what type of document has been brought into the system, because they might have different retention needs. So we have our application materials. You can see here we have folder for Justin. There's the 3 documents that I brought in for him that were application material. And then down here we have our tax records that are filed according to year. So the tax records have a different filing system, basically because what I have set up here is different retention schedules needed for these different types of documents. So the workflow is very simple, easy to use, very intuitive for the users, and I'll be discussing the workflow in a little bit more detail here later. One of the things to kind of walk you through is how the record properties might look within the system. So you can see here our tax records are set to be cut off at the end of every year. And then we have a retention schedule that says we want to keep these tax records for 3 years. It's probably a little short compared to the real world. And then after that 3 years, we go ahead and destroy those documents. The rest of our application materials, our benefits information, these all fall under different retention schedules. So you can see here that in the record properties, we actually have it set up with a different cutoff instruction. It says that we want to keep these for a certain amount of time after the employee has been discharged. So they stay in the system as long as the employee stays with the company until they've been discharged. And then from that point on, we keep the documents for 5 years after that. And then they can be destroyed. All right, so as a records manager, we obviously have some different duties that we have to take into account being a records manager within Laserfiche. And those are broken down and made much easier with simple records management searches. For instance, we'll go ahead and do a search for any documents that are ready for cutoff. So obviously, I have gone through and set some records up in here. You can see that these documents are all ready for cutoff because we're past 2015, so anything before the end of 2015 really are ready to be cut off. So I can actually, select the individual documents or even the folders. We can do it at a folder level, and you can just go here to our records management actions, and we can perform cutoff. Another thing that you want to pay attention to is the ability to freeze documents in the event that a document might be part of a existing lawsuit or some sort of entanglement there, and we need to freeze the records. And what that does is automatically drops them out of the retention process so that they're skipped in the searches, and you don't have to worry about those getting destroyed when really we have to hold on to them until the end of the suit. All right, so that is kind of the basics of our records management system. So just wanted to kind of review how this was all set up. And basically, the way that Laserfiche handles records management, there's a lot of different moving parts, but they're all very easy to create. The first thing we need to look at are the cycle definitions. So what kind of cycles do we need created in the system? These are actually all of the default ones that come in Laserfiche. So bi-monthly, you need to have it broken up 2 times a month, calendar, half yearly, quarterly, yearly. So all of the basic, these usually will be enough for most people. That is just some additional ones. Sorry. So the ones that I am using are, is this not, there we go. The ones that I was focusing on was the calendar yearly, and you can see that basically you can define when you want the cutoff to happen. So in this case, we have it set to December year end. So at the end of the year, the calendar yearly can be utilized, and we can tell the system we're done with this document. Another one that people might utilize a lot is the fiscal quarterly, so or the fiscal year. And obviously, when you are out here, if your fiscal year is different than what they already have set up here, you would just go through and change the different quarters in this case, or the year from being July 1st to June 30th, or vice versa. And this is all done within the administration console, and I'm just taking snippets to make it a little bit easier to view and look at. All right, so then the other thing that we had set up were different cutoff instructions. And you can see here that in the cutoff instruction area within the admin console, we just created 2 different ones, one based on just the end of the year, and another one based on what we call an event end time. So it is yearly once an employee has been discharged. And you'll see the setup to those right here. And so all of this is very easy to set up within the system. That's really one of the things we want to stress, is really how easy it is to get all of this built out here. You just give it a name. You can give it a description, of course. Then we have the type, which is a drop-down. Allows you to set different cutoff instructions. You can have a time-based, which is what our end of year is. You can have it set to time plus event, which is our yearly after employee discharge. You can see there that I told it it's a time plus event. I set it to calendar yearly for the cycle, and then in the events there, I said the event that we are using is an employee discharge. And so you can customize the different events that are needed based on what your organization will utilize. All right. And then we come to our retention schedules. We had two different retention schedules within the system. We told the system to retain for 5 years after the employee discharge took place. And then we had another one that was much more basic. So just retain for 3 years, and then we can go ahead and destroy those. And again, in the setup screen, this is all accessed, like I said, from the administration console. And this is an example of the retention schedule that we set up. So you can see there that we gave it some instructions, told it how long to keep the item. And one thing to keep in mind about retention and the way that the system works in Laserfiche, the cutoff instruction is very important, because the retention does not start until an item has reached cutoff. So potentially, if you have a retention period of 5 years, you could end up keeping an item for 6 years if it came into the system in January, because it would be there for that entire first year and then cut off at the end of the year. So it's one of those things to keep in mind when you are going to design these. You really want to think out how that will all work together. So my tax records were set to use the end of year cutoff and then retain for 3 years. And really I'm just showing the two differences between the tax records and all the other records. So we have our cutoff instruction, again, set, it's just a drop down. Then we have our retention schedule, and we tell it which one we want to use. All the other personnel records, we're using a yearly after discharge cutoff, and then a retention schedule from there. And hopefully this is a little more interesting. So this I really wanted to focus on. This is the workflow that was used to run the documents through our retention. And you'll see that it's actually a very, very simple workflow. You can see that we have essentially 5, 6 real steps that take place in this workflow to file things differently, all based on what we fill in to our template. So the workflow there starts off by retrieving the information from our templates. So that's the first step. Then there's a routing decision. So there's some sort of logical decision that has to take place there that says, what type of document is this? Is it a tax record in this case, or is it not a tax record? So this one's pretty easy. The routing decision obviously can be broadened out if you have multiple needs based on all of the different document types. You might have a branch for each of those. Then we just file the record into the records series, again, based on whether or not it's a tax document or the other type of documents that we have there. Have a simple rename entry, And then the last step is to create a shortcut up into the human resources area so that your human resources user can see those documents. So this is really how the transparent portion of records management works. Through the use of shortcuts, we allow different users access to different things by basically what we call folder tunneling. So while the user wasn't able to see the records management record series out in the folder structure, they actually have access to all those documents. It's just a way of allowing or setting that access rights according to what is needed by the user. And as per usual, I spoke way too fast. So any questions on records management in general? Anything you'd like to see on the demo VM machine?
The cutoff, that's so you can't add another record to that? Or what is cutoff exactly?
The cutoff is more of a signal to the system. So it's a document doesn't enter its retention lifecycle until cutoff has taken place. So it's really used as a means of notifying the system that this document is ready to go into retention. Yes?
So do you have to set it up to use the shortcuts with that? I mean, that.
Okay, good question. So the question was, do we have to utilize shortcuts in order to set it up? You certainly don't have to use shortcuts. The biggest point of the shortcuts is to show what we call the transparent records management. You can certainly just set up a records management system with the folder structure and everything set the way it is and have the documents out there. Really the purpose of the shortcuts is to allow for different views for different users so that the HR user in this case can just see everything filed by employee, whereas the records manager is able to see things filed by the different document types. I just wanted to see if there's any, I think Andrew's handling the questions online, but if not, please let me know. Yes?
Is this a part of Rio already, or is it separate?
Oh, that's a good question. Sean, where'd you go? That is a sales question. The question was, is records management a part of Rio? And I believe that it might be an add-on. Sean?
What was the question?
Is records management included with Rio, or is that?
So records management, the module that Ron was showing off, is an add-on in both Rio and Avante. However, a lot of the things that Ron was showing off today do apply and can be worked with in Avante or Rio just as workflows. And so don't feel, I mean, the process and the best practices are the part that's really, that you've got to make sure you get down. But the records management tools are the things that can help you do that a lot easier. The use of retention schedules, things like that. Does that answer your question? Whose question was it, by the way?
All right, and it looks like I did have a question online. Someone was saying, so if somebody leaves in November, so one of the employees leaves the company in November, will it delete in December or next November? And so the way that would work is if they left in November, that's the event portion of it. Then in December, at the end of December, that would be the calendar yearly portion. So really what it would do is it would enter into retention in January, basically right after the employee left. So obviously if you had an employee that left in January, their documents would end up in the system for that entire year before they were cut off. But if they leave in November, then they're cut off at the end of December. So the cutoff period can be, very flexible in the amount of time that it is in there.
I guess it's just a little confusing. It's a separate product.
Mhm.
So how is that different from what's just named? I guess I'm still confused on what you're gonna, because obviously record retention is gonna be a natural part of any management system. So what are you gonna get from buying records management?
The records management module essentially.
Real quick, Rob, before you get to it, just for everyone on the webinar, the question was, what is the difference between the records management edition module and what is included within Laserfiche natively? So now you can answer.
All right. The records management module allows you to perform searches based on the cutoff instructions to set up the retention schedule. So, in theory, you could set up multiple just folder structures, using the same process that we are now. But it's just, it doesn't follow the retention records management system itself. So you don't have cutoff capabilities. You can't freeze records. That's kind of one of the big things that it adds to the.
Does that answer your question, Mark?
Well, how do you set up record retention without it?
Well, you would have to.
So say you have,
Yep.
you're creating documents on a daily basis and you want to retain those for 3 years, and after that you want to dispose of those records.
Right. So without the records management module, you basically would have to perform multiple searches looking for items that, okay, well, I need to go out and do a search for documents that were created more than 3 years ago. We have to find a way of filtering them out versus documents that we might want to keep for, more than 3 years. So obviously, it's things like that that make the records management module worth it, because you can then set all that based on the folder it's in.
Another question online, and then forgive me if you've answered this already, but wondering how many sites have power users versus all forms workflows simply being developed by the IT personnel. Do you find that that's common, that sites will have power users?
That different organizations will have power users? Absolutely. One of our goals is to obviously allow users to take, empower themselves and to be able to use workflows. Working with Heather over there, she's learning workflow and is starting to get very good at it there. So, certainly we have a lot of our clients are using power users to create workflows and administer the system.
I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind, Ron, since we've got plenty of time, if you wouldn't mind going into your virtual machine, specifically within the workflow, and explaining some of the logic on how you built out that workflow, specific to your to the routing and then generating shortcuts, because you kind of powered through that particular portion, but sometimes the logic gets a little lost in there. So could you just talk about some of those best practices a little bit?
Yeah. So like I said, the workflow was a fairly straightforward workflow. We basically were grabbing the information off of the HR template. So the employee name, employee ID, what kind of document it is. And in this case, we then were using the routing to determine what type of document it was. And that was based on the document type field off of the template itself. So if the document type equals tax records, that is the branch that it flows down. If it does not equal tax records, it flowed down the other path. And again, this was a very simple demonstration that we can add multiple paths into the routing decision to based on the different retention needs. Then in our move here, so the move was moving things into the record series. So in this case, the tax record series. And then we were routing them by date. And the date is, just grabbing the year so that they're filing by the appropriate year. If we look at the other items, they had a little bit more to the routing in that we were using the document type to file them into the appropriate record series based on the document type. And then we were also including the employee name, creating a folder for the employee name. Just another way of breaking those apart. That certainly didn't have to be done. We could have just filed them by application type. This enabled us to mark an employee as discharged a little bit easier because we can mark the folder itself. And then the rename entry was also very basic. I was just grabbing the employee name and the document type at the end of it, just to, again, differentiate what this document is versus another document that might be filed out there. And this is more helpful in the actual shortcuts that the human resources user is seeing. So here, we are telling it to create a shortcut, file it into human resources using the employee name and the employee number. And we certainly could have gotten more sophisticated in the filing here as well. We could have broken those up by application type, dates, whatever your needs are, we can set that up within the system. So, oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask, do you recommend when you have a very simple basic workflow here that handles a couple of steps of the process, would you recommend when you're thinking about this process of record retention having small manageable workflows like this that kind of feed into one another, or a larger process that takes a lot of time to test and support and build over the course of a number of weeks and months, however long it takes to build out the process? What do you recommend there?
If possible, I think smaller workflows are certainly easier to manage and to get built and to get different portions up and running. One thing that you can really utilize with workflow now is the ability to, if you're kind of doing the same thing for a lot of different items, you could break that out of a big, large workflow and make it kind of its own workflow, and then have those other workflows initiate that workflow. So if you have kind of the same naming process all throughout your repository, you could just have a rename workflow that you utilize and kick off from multiple workflows based on that. So now that we're able to do that, Laserfiche is actually recommending more smaller workflows and being kicked off because it allows also for better system efficiency. You can utilize the multi-threading aspect of workflow better when we're kicking off multiple smaller workflows than one grand workflow that is waiting for something to take place.
Can you, when you say multi-threading, what are you referring to?
That is more of a hardware thing, but basically it allows for the server to be able to run multiple workflows all at once within, basically CPU time is what that all comes down to.
Looks like we have another question online. Does the system maintain a log of what documents were destroyed in case a public records request is received? And what is the information on that log, etc.? Employee file name, doc type, period, destruction date, etc.
Great question, Lily. I can actually show you that because I have some documents that I have destroyed out here. And this comes down to how you want it to be handled within the system. One of the options within our record retention is whether or not to keep the metadata. So you can see here, poor Eric left the company, and there isn't an actual document within the system anymore. So there's no pages, there's no thumbnails, but you are able to see the template information as it existed at the time that the document was destroyed. So that is one way that you can tell that the document has been destroyed. In addition, is of course this icon. You'll never see this icon unless it is a destroyed record. That's a special icon that Laserfiche uses to denote those.
And how long is that log maintained in the system?
That log is maintained forever, I believe, within the system. If you tell the system to keep that information, it will be there forever.
Looks like there was another question from Lily.
Oh, yeah.
I may have missed a section of the webinar. Are there two different workflows to file the documents, one for the records manager and one for the user? Reference your HR sample, please.
Yeah, absolutely. There is actually only one workflow. And just to go back to it just for a moment, and I can run another example through here. The workflow itself is performing all the work right here. It's a very simple workflow. We are initially filing items into the records series. That's this portion right here. And then we're creating shortcuts into the HR area for the HR user. So if I come over here to bring some documents in, I'll just go ahead and import a few and run them through. And so we'll just grab these three, import these sample documents, and I can then set my HR template at the time that the documents are being brought into the system. We can set the employee number. Of course, we could also set up an automatic update to where the employee number is linked to a name, an employee name, so you don't have to fill it in. So if this is all benefits information, we can bring that in and go ahead and click on OK. So the documents are now being, whoops, I forgot to set this.
It's an important.
That is an important one. So when you're bringing in multiple documents at once, you want to always check this box down at the bottom if they all have the same metadata. So now we'll go ahead and bring in the documents into incoming scans. It will file the documents into the records area. And so if I come in here, oh, I didn't uncheck the, so now we have some information for Sean. There's the first one I brought in. The other two documents are in there. You can see there's nothing in incoming scans. So this is what the records manager sees. If I want to log in as the, of course I can't see that. If I want to log in as a regular user, or in this case an HR user.
So this is kind of a trick of the system right now that you're logging as a different user, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Obviously, most organizations use Windows authentication, which takes care of all this, but I am not. So here is what the HR manager or a user who will see. They come out here to the human resources, and they just go to Sean, and there's the three documents that were brought in there. So that workflow automatically does that, sets up the view for both different user types within the system.
Let's see if we have any more questions. Oh, Lily says thank you.
Perfect. All right.
So just as we're kind of closing up, what other tools, either that's new in Laserfiche 10 or other tools that are outside of the records management series and workflow, can the user use to even do less work than what you just showed off? Are there any other tools that they can use?
Well, of course, probably the best new tool that Laserfiche has is Laserfiche Forms, which Eric will be demonstrating here in a bit, and he'll be going over how to set up a forms process and and walking everybody through that. That's definitely a good one. An often overlooked one, but very powerful and helpful, is Import Agent. Import Agent is great if you don't have a scanner set right there on your desk. You can use a large office scanner, import into a certain folder.
You mean a scanner like this under $2,000 Canon scanner that's sitting right in front of you?
Right, right. If we had another webcam, we'd point it at it. Absolutely. So if you don't have a scanner like that, if you have a large office scanner that the whole organization uses, you can scan to a network folder, and Import Agent can grab it and automatically assign certain values to it and bring it into the system for processing.
Any other questions from those of us in the room here?
Oh, looks like Lily has another question. Let's see. We have various departments who forward their documents to use to Laserfiche. Should we create separate incoming scans folders so as to not commingle documents? That is really, that's a very good question, but almost one I usually turn back around to you. It depends on, obviously, what your needs are in the organization. I have quite a few organizations I work with that will create an incoming scans, and then within there we'll set up different either departmental level or different user level folders within the incoming scans. And usually the main reason for that has to do with one of two things. Document volume. They just have such a large volume, they need some way of breaking those apart so that their users can work on their documents and they know exactly where they're coming from. Or security reasons. Obviously, if there's HR documents being scanned into incoming scans and everybody has access to that, that probably is a no-no. So we would probably set up a separate human resources incoming scans for only human resources people to utilize. So it really comes down to what your organization needs, who's doing the scanning, who's doing the processing. You know, that's usually one of those questions that during an implementation, when we're working with you, we talk about and get that set the way you need it to.
And in theory, each individual or each department can have, depending on your security rights, can have their own incoming scans folder that is specific to them that workflow's watching, but nobody else can see or utilize, correct?
Absolutely. Yep. So you can, you know, your HR users would go to incoming scans and see an HR folder, but nobody else would see that folder there.
Another question from Lily. Does it affect the system flow if you have multiple folders?
No, it does not. Nope.
Sorry, I have one other question. If you are using
You don't have to
shortcuts
apologize, by
in
the way.
your workflows, are you, assuming you have access, are you able to see from a shortcut where the original is filed or from the original where it has shortcuts filed?
So repeat the.
So we had a question here on our side asking if you are looking at shortcuts, can you see where the original file is located? And generally, no. The answer is no. Also, there is no easy way, as Heather can attest, to tell you that there are shortcuts to a document. Laserfiche does have a way now in workflow to where, you know, if we ever need to do a shortcut cleanup, I can do a search and say, run all these documents and use the main documents and say, find all the shortcuts. And it goes out into the system, finds all those shortcuts for you, and more than likely we would delete them and then run it through whatever process the document should go through so that there's only one. So
you can do it through search, but not necessarily by looking at the file.
right, right. And workflow can do it much more easily than we can. So.
Are there any issues when you're, well, actually, I'll switch that up. Can you implement processes into the workflows to handle some of that cleanup when that shortcut is no longer necessary?
Absolutely, yes. We have a lot of approval processes that we set up for users that, aside from records management uses, a lot of times we'll file the main document into its final resting location right away, but we might send a shortcut out into some sort of approval folder structure that is then approved, or it goes through that entire process. And once that process is finished, the workflow just wipes out that shortcut because it's not needed anymore, or moves it to another location, or maybe a secondary approval process, and then we'll clean it up from there.
Okay.
I have a question about the user folder structure view. Does the user set that up themselves, or is that something that admin needs to set up?
That is usually something that we'll have, the admin set up at your organization. It really depends on what access you have. So if you're an HR manager, we might just give HR managers the ability to create new folders, to set up folder structure and do whatever they'd like. Generally, we try to limit that from your regular users so that you don't have folders just being created wherever and named. If we can, we like to run the workflow and use that to name folders so that they're always in a uniform naming convention.
Well, at this time, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this this portion of the session. Let's go ahead and thank Ron for presenting on transparent records management and auto filing.
Absolutely.
Hi, everyone. At this point, we're going to take about a 5-minute break. Give us a chance to flip over, give everyone here a chance to take a break, grab something to drink, use the restroom if need be, and we'll be back with you with Eric Informs.